you're laying in bed and after about 10, 15 minutes, if you're really not going to fall asleep, if you're laying there and you're staring at the ceiling, it's better to get out of bed, do something boring, and then get back in bed. So you strengthen that association, bed and sleep, not bed awake, bed frustrated, bed planning, bed worrying.
Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Lena Holmes. Every day we make hundreds of decisions. Some are routine and others shape our relationships, our work, and even our future. But how often do we stop to consider that the quality of those decisions may begin with the night before? More than 1/3 of American adults report that they regularly don't get enough sleep. In today's episode, I'm joined by clinical psychologist and sleep specialist, Dr. Melissa Milanak. Together, we'll explore how poor sleep may be quietly affecting your judgment, emotional resilience, relationships, and your ability to discern what matters most. If you're looking for practical insights to help you think more clearly, perform at your best, and steward your health more intentionally, I think you'll find this conversation both fascinating and incredibly helpful. So let's get started. Welcome to the show, Dr. Milanak.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Great. So let's jump right into the questions that I have for you today. So just start with a real simple question. What are some of the ways I think a lot of people, at least for me, I'm just thinking about when I go to sleep, what I go through, and I'm not very good at this. So you're going to be a great help, not only to our audience, but to me as well. So how do we turn our brains off in order to fall asleep at night with it seems like everything throughout the day gets repeated. It goes on and on. How do you turn your brain off at night?
So one of the things that you've touched on is exactly why that's happening. So throughout the day, everything that's happening, our brain is designed to process information for us. And so even not just stresses and worries or planning, but also good things to process through, to decide what it needs to hold on to, what doesn't need to be remembered. And so for most of us, we are so busy throughout the day, filling our day with everything else that needs to get done or trying to avoid the things that we don't want to think about. So once we climb in bed, for most people, it's the first time that we're alone with our thoughts. Scary. And the first time that we have no distractions. That's why so many people are now relying on their phones, on TV. I need to watch a TV Netflix episode or listen to a podcast or a sleep story, because what's happening is our brain needs to process this information. And because we're not giving it the opportunity to do so throughout the day, it's going to try to capitalize on when it has the opportunity to do so. So what we need to do first is take back control of when our brain does the processing. Knowing and being equipped with the information that it has to do it, have us decide when that's going to be. So typically, I will tell people about, say, 15, 20 minutes before it's time to go to bed. I want you to take a notepad and a pen, no technology. We don't want any distractions. We don't want the light. We want to do this outside of bed. And on the right-hand side, I like to have you write your to-do list for the next day. I have to go to the bank. I have to go to the dry cleaners. I need to watch this podcast episode. All the important things that need to happen. Because you're going to lay in bed and you're naturally going to think about what you have to do for the next day. But what happens when we want to try to remember something? We think about it over and over again. We repeat it to ourselves. And so now we're laying in bed trying to keep our brain awake so we don't forget what we need to do. And that's counterproductive to falling asleep. Then on the other side of the page, what you're going to do is you're going to take everything that's running through your mind. It doesn't have to be organized. It can be all over the place. And you are just going to start pouring all of that onto the page. It can be bullet points. It can be sketches. I usually will tell people when they're first starting the exercise to start with a timer for 5 minutes, because the first minute is going to be something high level, kids, finances, health, and you're going to write and get in bed and your brain's going to keep going. We need to exhaust the brain. So we need to think about all the things that we've been trying to avoid thinking about. So we're going to dump it all on the page. You're going to find, you might think to yourself, why was I thinking about this? Or am I creating more worries? No, we're actually letting our brain do what it's needed to do. And because we're dumping it out on the page, we're not taking it to sleep with us anymore. So you take it, you're going to feel exhausted. you put it on the nightstand, and you get in bed. And if your mind is still running and racing, you get out of bed, write more, and get back in bed. Just like you take a puppy and you put it outside when you're teaching it for house training, you're teaching your brain that it doesn't get to go in bed. And so now what you'll find is not only are you thinking less in bed, but you're also more efficient in the morning because you have your to-do list before your coffee. And if you wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning and your mind is running and racing, you get out of bed again. We're really wanting to connect the association that our bed is for sleep, not for thinking and processing and planning, and letting our brain know that it's going to get the opportunity to do that. Now, if you still find that you can't shut your brain off, there are other activities. Some people will engage in meditations and in different, like, kind of visualizations. Some people will engage in something called cognitive shuffling, where they feel like they can't just lay in bed and do nothing. They need something to keep their brain slightly active. So with cognitive shuffling, take a relaxing word, like a word blanket, that you could think of associated with sleep. And you're going to lay there and you're going to visualize it and feeling relaxed. And then you're going to take every letter of the word and come up with a list of other words that begin with that letter. So we'll start with the B for blanket. Maybe you're thinking balloon, baby, whatever you're thinking through until you run out of words. And then you go to the L. And the majority of people will be fast asleep before they even get halfway through the word.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, the fact that you said get out of the bed, I think too, there's some things that I've read. They say start by lowering the light before you go to sleep. And of course, no electronics at least an hour before you or several hours before you go. It's kind of like a winding down process. But getting out of the bed and doing a brain dump, if you will, I think that is probably much more effective than some of the other ways people have been saying you ought to do this.
There's a couple things with that really quickly. So, one is that light obviously plays a significant role in our ability to sleep. Our eyes perceive light, they send messages. There's a little part of the brain. It's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, but think of it as a sleep switch. It's light out, be awake. It's dark out, be asleep. And so, as the sun used to set, that would trigger the brain to start to prepare for sleep. That's why our body starts to produce melatonin and tends to spike in melatonin about 4 to 6 hours before
Mm.
we go to bed, because the change in light is what's triggering the body to prepare for that. So we do, and that's a whole other conversation we can have if you want. But so it is important to be reducing the light. Like, don't have the overhead lights on, use your side lamps, pay attention to those pieces. But part of it too, the core pieces are going to be our body knowing when it's time to feel tired, having that consistent schedule, understanding what bed is for. If most people were going to go to the movies to see a show or go to the cinema, and I said, what snack are you going to get?
Oh,
Most people would say movies,
popcorn.
popcorn,
Yeah.
right? So your brain immediately makes that association, movies, popcorn. It's the same thing that we want your brain to do with your bed and sleep. So that's
I
why
see.
if you're laying there.
It's like how the brain associates, makes the association. Got it.
Correct.
Mhm.
So that's why when you're laying in bed and you're wide awake and you're thinking and you're planning, now your brain thinks, ooh, bed is for that. I can fill this need, instead of bed is for sleep. And so that's why if you're laying in bed and after about 10, 15 minutes, if you're really not going to fall asleep, if you're laying there and you're staring at the ceiling, it's better to get out of bed, do something boring, empty the
Mm.
dishwasher, fold the laundry, get yourself to feel tired again, and then get back in bed. So you strengthen that association, bed and sleep, not bed awake, bed frustrated, bed planning, bed worrying.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, does sharing your bed with a partner, kids, pets, or whatever, or your iPad or, or your phone and everything that's in the bed with you, what impact do these things have on people and their quality of sleep?
That's what I was going to say. Anything that's in the bed with you is going to impact your ability to sleep. So obviously there are some that is easier to remove than others. You can have a lot of people that are very adamant about sleeping with their pet. And there's a lot of interesting research out there showing that people that sleep with the pet in the room, but not in the actual bed, tend to have the best overall sleep, and
Hmm.
oftentimes in terms of it being healthiest for the pet. So there's a lot of research out there showing that for dogs especially, that if they're sleeping in the bed with their human, they have a higher risk and a higher percentage of showing separation anxiety. It
Oh,
comes from
wow.
animal behavior, alpha, and if they're since sleep is considered a vulnerable state, when they're in a vulnerable state of sleeping and they're right next to the alpha, it trains them that they aren't effective to care for themselves and keep themselves safe. So you see
Mhm.
an increase in separation anxiety. Obviously, that's different than pets for health conditions and, service animals. I have some people, for instance, though, that have, like, for instance, lost a spouse and sleeping with the pet gives them comfort because they're not used to sleeping alone. So there are pros and cons, but we do know that the movements, the temperature changes for pets can cause significant concerns. When we get to children, same type of thing, where when they're very little, newborns and young infants, most of the time it's very unsafe for them because if you accidentally would roll or hurt them, then you see different cultures have different backgrounds of family bed. But we do want to teach children, same thing, that they are able that they're safe in their own bed. That's different than the family unit and spending the time together, but wanting children to understand that they can sleep in their own bed, that they can have that autonomy and that safety. So there's a lot there. It's a very dividing topic of children in the bed. You see a lot of families that the youngest child tends to be in the bed the longest because there's this connection with not wanting the kids to grow up sometimes.
Mm.
So, and that's different than there's a thunderstorm or there's a nightmare and they've crawled in bed for, once every couple months versus every single night. There's a lot of variability from pediatric sleep specialists on when it's a good thing and when it isn't, and recognizing that there are both pieces there. With a significant other, one of my colleagues, Wendy Troxel, has a phenomenal book called Sharing the Covers. And there's so much about talking about the other person in terms of if somebody goes to bed at a different time, if somebody needs a different temperature, if one person has the lights on, or if you're waking up earlier. And so there's a lot there that I will work with couples on in terms, maybe you have earplugs that have a personalized alarm. And so it wakes you up, but not your spouse. Maybe you wear an eye mask or earplugs so you don't see when they turn the light on or off. If you're the person getting up earlier, maybe you get ready in a separate bathroom so you're not disturbing, watching TV together outside of bed. There's so much about those schedules and not to mention when you have the snore monster sleeping next to you and sleep apnea and those disruptions for a lot of women as they have certain hormonal changes and temperature from being the cold one to the warm one. So there's a lot there to navigate in terms of finding that balance. The first step is having the conversation and understanding what's healthiest for your sleep, and then working with your partner to be as consistent as you can be with the environment, that cold, dark, quiet, comfortable, and with the scheduling of your sleep.
Now, I don't know if it's true or not because you can't believe everything you see on YouTube. But there was a lady on YouTube that was saying that in Germany, husband and wife, they sleep apart. They don't sleep in the same bed. And it's a cultural thing. It was a cultural thing in the United States at one time, at least when you saw on television certain shows, the
Oh,
old
Dick
shows
Van Dyke,
where they
right? Or
had,
Married
yeah,
Tyler
yeah,
Moore, where they
two
have their two
separate
separate
beds.
beds.
Right, right, right. So, yeah.
And that concept of sleep, they call it sleep divorce currently. There are very many couples that are now doing that. I actually have a couple I was working with in New York. They had a small studio, and so they had bunk beds in their
Mm,
bedroom. So they were able to find, and they wanted to be together and spend that time together, but they needed different temperatures. They needed different firmness of the mattress because one person had surgery, and so there can a lot of couples with temperature differences, with snoring, CPAP machines, also even just schedules. If one person's a night owl and one person's an early bird, and they found that when they were both sleeping at their best, not only were they healthiest, but they were better together
mm.
because we know that when our sleep is disrupted that it can impact our relationships in many ways, our resilience, our ability to deal with feeling frustrated or stressed and to communicate and to feel joy. So there are a lot of couples that make that decision that they do want to sleep separately, and it just depends on each individual couple's decision.
Interesting. Very interesting. So,
There's so
what
much we could talk about with all of these topics.
yeah, I bet. So, substances. I think there's a misconception that alcohol actually, even though I don't drink alcohol, but alcohol actually makes you sleepy or it allows you to de-stress. Some people use alcohol to try to de-stress. And we're going to talk about that a
Mhm.
little bit later. I'm going to ask you about de-stressing, but what about substances like caffeine and alcohol and just anything, sugar? How do these things have an impact on your quality of sleep?
So much with each of these topics. Let's start with caffeine. So, from a caffeine standpoint, a lot of people will say, well, I can have 2 espressos and fall right to sleep. If you can drink that much caffeine and fall right to sleep, we need to talk about your tolerance that you've built up. But I think the key to note with caffeine is that caffeine doesn't actually make you less tired. What it does is it blocks your ability to perceive that you're tired. So, what
Mm,
I mean by that is so throughout the day, our body is building up a chemical called adenosine. And the more adenosine that's in our body, the more tired or sleepiness, that heaviness that we feel. Caffeine mimics that molecule. It's very similar in chemical structure. And so when we have caffeine in our system and our body is perceiving that, we're not able to always recognize how much adenosine is in our body. So if you think through that, we're tired, but we're not registering that we're tired. It's like people that are taking medications that are appetite suppressants and you're hungry, but you aren't eating because you don't realize that you're hungry. And so the caffeine can be good in some ways, the way that it will have the activation on the system. But the problem is that when you are relying on caffeine every single day, feeling tired is actually a really important thing to notice.
mm,
It's the same thing as we would think about with pain. Here's what I mean. If I had my hand and I put it on a hot stove and it started to hurt, that indication of pain tells me move my hand to protect me from getting burned. When I feel tired, that tells my body you need to rest before you completely burn out. And
mm.
so caffeine can be helpful to give us that jolt, but when we're using more and more and we don't feel tired ever, that can make it harder to fall asleep. But that's why people can still fall asleep on caffeine because your body's still tired. You're just not registering that you are. The alcohol piece, I love what you were saying because so many people will say to me, well, yeah, I've had a long day and I have a couple drinks and it calms me down and I fall right to sleep. And the first thing I will always say is sedation is not sleep. So just because you're unconscious doesn't mean that you're actually getting quality, restful sleep. Now, I'm
Mhm.
not saying that you won't have the glass of wine with dinner or the nightcap, but what's happening, one, for people that are using alcohol consistently in the evenings, we can see that it can reduce their ability to get REM sleep, one of the stages of sleep that's really important for our brain to heal and to repair. And for a lot of people, they will see more fragmented sleep. We know that it's healthiest sleep when it's consolidated throughout the night, meaning that we're not waking up a lot of times. When we're drinking alcohol, we're more likely to wake up multiple times, not just because our bladder needs to use the restroom, but also because of the way that the alcohol impacts glutamate and all these different parts of our system. And so we want to be paying attention to how that the GABA systems and glutamate and alcohol and what it's doing with it. So again, alcohol is fine if you are legally allowed and healthy to do so, and it's part of what you want to engage in, but we don't want to be using it as the self medication to sleep because the majority of the time it'll actually make your sleep worse.
If you enjoy conversations that help you to lead with wisdom, cultivate discernment, and remain faithful to your calling, then I invite you to subscribe to the Servant Leaders Mindset podcast. So please hit that button and subscribe. It would really help us out. Now back to the show. I see. Well, that's a good segue into I do monitor my sleep. I don't know how reliable wearables are, but I do have a Apple Watch. And so I do look at it daily and sometimes, and as soon as you wake up periodically just to see what quality of sleep that I'm getting. It also actually monitors to see whether or not you have sleep apnea or not. And
Hmm.
so that's a good indication to if you're worried about that, that's something that you can discuss with your doctor if that's showing up on your wearables. What are your thoughts about that? And, are they reliable in terms of monitoring sleep?
So, from a wearable standpoint, I will say that there are lots of pros for the majority of people. And here's what I mean by that. So, we see in general that when we monitor and observe something, we can positively impact it. So, if I asked all of your listeners to take the next week and keep a journal of everything that they ate, you probably would find that by the end of the week, they were eating healthier because they want to write down an apple instead of the box of cookies. So when we're paying attention to our sleep, it already automatically makes us be more aware of, oh, I had those 2 drinks last night and I didn't sleep as well, or I did this exercise, or I ate this sugary snack. So there are many things that tracking it are going to help us. A lot of people also don't realize what parts of their sleep need to be adjusted and helped. I
Hmm.
say that with the caveat that there are about 10 to 15% of people that I will not recommend a wearable for. And that's because they become so fixated on the data that it can make them feel more anxious. So I
Oh,
usually will tell people, okay, we know that when we're looking at the sleep data, we want about 20 to 25% of your sleep each night to be spent in the deep sleep stage with your body healing and repairing. We know we want about 20 to 25% to be in REM sleep with your brain healing and repairing. Well, some people say, well, I was only at 17 or I was at 26%. And so you have to be cautious. That's what ties into the accuracy question that you have. And what we know is that now there are so many different devices out there. You're not going to have any that are 100% accurate. You have to go into the lab and do the polysomnography and all those different metrics to have 100% in terms of accuracy and mapping on. But there are a number of these devices that are very accurate, say 90 to 95% mapping on to what you could get in the hospital and in the lab. And so the keys here are that we want to be paying attention to first, is it giving us those stages of sleep? Are we getting a general sense of how much time we're spending in deep sleep and REM sleep? How many times we're waking up, those types of disruptions, and looking at the pattern over time. So maybe your device says that you typically are getting 22% of REM sleep. And then all of a sudden, for a night or two, it's dropped to 16 or it's increased to 28. That change in pattern can mean a lot more than just the specific percentage point because it's showing you that there's a significant variation. That's why we want to wear it every day as consistently as we can so we can see pattern changes over time. The
hmm.
other things that are really important to pay attention to that most of the devices will give you are going to be your oxygen levels, your O2 saturation, because
Hmm.
we want to make sure we're keeping that, that 90, 95% or depends on where you live and altitude and other things.
Hmm.
But in general, when we're seeing that drop, that's for a lot of people with sleep apnea. They may not realize because they might say, well, yeah, I don't stop breathing. Well, there are a lot of people where it's just that their oxygen levels drop. And because it drops enough, that puts more stress and strain on the heart. The heart has to work harder. Your body can't fully relax and heal because it has to focus on trying to breathe. So we want to be looking at our oxygen levels and we want to be looking at the heart rate variability. We want that to be as large a number as possible, showing that our heart rate can get really high with exercise or protecting us from a threat, but that it can fully decompress and reduce. People that have a much smaller heart rate variability range, typically that's an indicator that their stress levels are higher. And so they're struggling with the ability to fully decompress. Think of it as you have the kettle on the stove that's boiling and you're turning it down, but you're only turning it down to simmering instead of fully off. So it doesn't feel as bad because it's not boiling, but we don't, for most of us, realize that we never fully get the burner fully turned off. The majority of us are carrying a very baseline level of stress that's part of our life every single day. And most of us have no idea that it's there because that's become the norm. And again, sleep is a vulnerable state. So if our brain is perceiving that there's a potential threat because our body is tense, because of what our body is responding to, it's not going to let us completely rest and heal because it feels like it needs to be hypervigilant on the ready to protect us.
Mm, wow. That's a good segue into another question I was thinking about. Most people, if they're not getting enough sleep or if someone, a partner notices that a person stops breathing during the night, what they might have
Yeah.
sleep apnea,
Yes.
what when is it time to see a doctor? And what do medical doctors really know about sleep? Would they normally refer to someone else? What are some of the danger signs that people should be looking for to say, well, I better go get sleep study?
No, really great question. So, sleep studies are used a lot for sleep apnea. That's the top reason why we see it being used. But there are other reasons too. From a sleep apnea standpoint, what we find is that first, there are two different kinds of sleep apnea. Most people know about obstructive sleep apnea, OSA, and that's where you're breathing in and something is obstructing the ability for the oxygen to get to your lungs in a simplified way. So the snoring is because the air is passing over something. Maybe it's going to be the phalangeal tissue, the uvula, the tonsils, the adenoids. There's a deviated septum. When we're snoring, usually that's because there's an issue with the air being able to get into our lungs. Now, there are some people that snore that don't have sleep apnea, but the majority of people that are snoring do. And that's where we look at their oxygen levels. That's why I talked about the oxygen dropping. Apneas are when you completely stop breathing, and typically for about 10 seconds at a time.
Mm.
Hypopneas are when you're having the breathing restrictions and your oxygen levels are dropping, even if you don't completely stop breathing. So, what we find for people is that one part is going to be if you find that you sleep through the night, but you wake up and you always still feel tired, that's a trigger point. Let's go see the doctor because my sleep isn't restoring me. Maybe it's sleep apnea. Maybe I have idiopathic hypersomnolence or a million other things. I should get that checked out. Maybe it's something going on with my heart. That's why the American Heart Association added sleep to life's essential eight. We also will find that if you find that you fall asleep and you sleep well for the first 3 or 4 hours, and then you're waking up every hour and a half to 2 hours, the way that our body cycles through getting that REM sleep, usually the first bit of time, we're not having REM sleep. And then we start getting into a REM stage of sleep every hour and a half to 2 hours, which is where most people are experiencing sleep apnea. The reason for that, by the way, is that when we are dreaming, our body becomes paralyzed, so we don't act out our dreams. Like the squirrel, the dog chasing the squirrel, we don't want to injure ourselves or the person next to us. But when we become paralyzed, our muscles lose muscle tone. So for our neck muscles, they're going to collapse more on the airway because they're not toned and tight to keep the airway open.
Mm.
That's why when we hit REM sleep, a lot of people will start to have the apnea episodes. And so if you're sleeping well for the first 3, 4 hours, and then you're waking up every hour and a half to 2 hours, most people think it's just their bladder. But many times it's they're waking up because they can't breathe. And then once they start breathing again, they realize they need to use the restroom. So we want
Mm.
to pay attention to that pattern. A lot of people wake up in the morning and they might feel like they have a slight headache or feel a little dizzy. That can be an indicator because of the way that our body's getting the oxygen and having to work for it, or feeling like you sleep through the day, but by the afternoon, you're so exhausted and you never seem to fully get enough rest. Not to mention a significant other telling you that you're snoring and you stop breathing, but not everybody has a bed partner. So, for any of these, going to tell your doctor, and we know the older we get, the more that the risk percentage increases for men and for women, although we see it for men going initially more exponentially. And the thing is you would say to your doctor, I think I might have sleep apnea. I need a sleep study. From
Mm.
here, a few things could happen. Your doctor will, some people will refer you typically to a pulmonologist, a specific specialist that specializes in pulmonology and breathing. And pulmonologists are the ones that will assign a sleep study. You can also be assigned to a specific type of dentist. The American Academy of Dental Sleep Medicine, AADSM, has providers that go through extra years of treatment and training to learn about sleep breathing. Because sometimes they will create for people that can't tolerate a CPAP machine. They might give you a mouth guard to adjust the mouth position to help the oxygen flow. There's laser treatments, all different things that can happen. But next step would usually be to get you the sleep study. And a lot of people don't want to do the sleep study because they don't want to go into the lab of the hospital. Well, the good
Mm.
news is now with technology updates, you can do a sleep study at home. Your doctor, your pulmonologist, your dentist that has that specialty, they can actually send a sleep device to your house and you can wear it 1 or 2 nights at home so that you can do the sleep study in the comfort of your own home. And just because it comes back and tells you that you have sleep apnea, yes, most of the time we'd love you to use the CPAP machine. But don't avoid the sleep study just because you don't want one. Again, there are alternatives and things that we can use, but the goal is we need to know what's going on so that we can help you to breathe better. People that have sleep apnea and they have to have surgery, the anesthesiologist needs to know about that because that impacts the anesthesia that they use for surgery. There's so many implications other than just a CPAP machine that it's very, very important that if you think you might have it, at least go get it checked out.
Yeah, that's great. That's great information. Does exercise help your quality of sleep in any way?
Exercise is a great thing for our sleep. The more physically active we are, the more that our body is going to need the deep sleep to heal and to repair. And so the older we get, we actually get less and less deep sleep, which is why we find that when we're older, it might take us longer to heal from an injury or things might hurt a little more than they used to. And so when we're physically active, it doesn't mean you have to be training for a marathon, but whenever you're doing any type of exercise, that usually is going to increase the body's need for deep sleep, which is consequently going to help us to have more time in a stage of sleep to heal. Now, some people will, and that's kind of where the sleep study ties in as well, where they might not just describe muscle aches and pains, but they might also notice that they have certain movements. So for some individuals, for instance, if that we see iron deficiencies or impacts with testosterone and such, they're a higher risk to have things like restless leg syndrome, or people that have periodic limb movement with the systematic kind of twitching and such in the arms and the legs. That many times with the restless leg, they feel like they need to move. Now, some people feel like when they exercise more, they experience that. Some people just have it in general. So a sleep study will also pick up on that and see if you're having the movements or if your body isn't becoming paralyzed when you're dreaming. But just because you have those movements doesn't mean that that's the counterindication of exercise. Exercise is still a great thing to help our full body from all the health benefits that we know, but specifically from a sleep standpoint, it can help to increase the deep sleep. It helps our body to feel more tired and fatigued. Because what happens is for most of us, our brains get tired. We've been sitting all day, we're working, and then we climb in bed and we can't fall asleep because our physical body isn't tired. It's just our brain. That's why there's the difference between that fatigue and tiredness versus actual sleepiness. And so the exercise can help us to be able to feel more of the actual physical exhaustion and the tiredness to help us to fall asleep. I will say we usually recommend exercising earlier in the day when possible, because when we're exercising, our body temperature rises. We want to have that opportunity for our body and our brain to really cool down and wind down before sleep. So we don't really want to be exercising too heavily, those 2 to 3 hours before bed. But if you're the person that has to exercise after work, it's okay to do it. Just don't do your heavy workout and then immediately climb into bed.
And it's interesting that you said that a sleep study is not just an analysis to see whether or not a person has a sleep apnea. It also finds other things that might be going on during the sleep process. Is that correct?
Oh, yes. People that have
So it's a
narcolepsy,
full
for instance,
analysis of that.
all of it. Some people with narcolepsy, cataplexy, idiopathic hypersomnolence. There's so many things. Some like this term I'm saying, idiopathic hypersomnolence. Think of it as people that have a really high metabolism and they need to eat more because they burn calories faster. There are some people that their body burns sleep faster. They use up sleep and they're going to feel more tired. There are all these different things that from in-lab sleep studies, the polysomnography, there's something called a multi-sleep latency test where you actually go into the hospital and take 5 naps throughout the day and they see how quickly you fall asleep and what stage of sleep your brain jumps into. There's so much out there that if you are the person that you hear, so you know what? I just always thought I'd have poor sleep. I think the key is to know that there is hope. If it's difficulty falling asleep, if it's difficulty staying asleep, maybe you wake up earlier than you want, maybe you sleep through the night, but you still feel exhausted. There can be so many different answers and reasons, and it can feel complicated, but there are folks like myself, and especially when you think of your pulmonologist, your behavioral sleep medicine specialist, that can help you to figure that out. Every single person can get to a point where we can help them to sleep better, and it doesn't always mean it has to just be through taking medication. There can be behavioral changes for most people that can help depending on what the diagnosis is.
That's fascinating. It's about how do you figure out when to seek medical help and when it's just
Yeah.
something that's going on in your life at that particular time. Because people right now are under tremendous stress. Energy bills, grocery bills, all those things are stressing people out right now. What are some of the quick things that people could do or that you would recommend to them in terms of trying to distinguish whether they're just under tremendous stress and that's affecting their sleep at that moment? Or how can they de-stress and build some resilience just by doing just basic things in the process? I've always been told that when it comes to sleep, you have to plan. You can't just, like you said, jump in the bed with all your stuff and you have your phone and laptop and your iPad and all that, or a book in the middle of the bed and you're just kind of going through your pattern. That same way that you have built a pattern, whether you think you have or not, and it's really to identify that pattern. So what do you recommend? You talked about writing things down, which I think is really important, but how does someone distinguish if they're in a time in their life, let's say the death of a loved one, grieving,
Of course.
that's going to affect your sleep. So how do they deal with those kinds of things when you're having that extra stress?
So I think there are a few things that you've touched on there. So when you talk about planning your sleep and such, what I will usually say to folks is that typically there are two cores in terms of planning and routines that can help us to adjust our sleep and also how our stress plays into it. So One is having some type of sleep routine to tell our body when it's time to fall asleep. So we do this for children. We have the whole process of wash your face, brush your teeth, read a story, say your prayers, what your family does, and you have all these steps. As adults, most of us don't have that routine. We're lucky, we get ready for bed, brush it, we climb in bed, we doom scroll. Like that doom scrolling is our only trigger. So if there are 2 or 3 things that we can be doing, like that writing and journaling to help the brain to unwind, things for our physical body. So we talked about a moment ago, right? About if our brain is constantly scanning. It's checking to see, is there a potential threat? Do I need to protect you? And so it's looking to see how tight our muscles are, how fast our heart is beating, how quickly we're breathing. And many of us are holding tension in our bodies from everyday things, typing, driving. So doing something like progressive muscle relaxation, PMR, where you tighten the muscles, lift your ear up to your shoulders up to your ears, tight, 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 drop it, roll it out. When you do that throughout the whole body, the face, the shoulders, you're relieving tension. It's elongating the muscles. It's helping with circulation. The body is relaxing. When you're doing the stretching, all those different things before bed, then your brain is scanning and saying, oh, her muscle tension is reducing. Her breathing is slowing down. So there are things that people can do, whatever your routine is. Is it the writing and the journaling? Some people will do a gratitude journal. Some people will do a prayer journal. It depends on what your routines are. But when you're doing multiple things before bed, not just the technology, not something that has to be plugged in, but you do the same thing every night. This is actually something that I work with new parents on, where they wake up with the baby monitor or the new, and what can you do when you wake up to fall back to sleep again? Okay, what pattern, what routine can I do over and over again? So those types of things help to be able to de-stress. Additionally, the key, if you do nothing else from a sleep standpoint, whenever somebody's sleep is disrupted, I typically start with the concept of the sleep window. It's actually what my entire TEDx talk was about. And so the idea of having a set bedtime and a set wake time 7 days a week, as consistently as we can be. And I get it. It may not be that way all the time. You have travel, you stay up late to watch the Super Bowl or the World Cup, or you're traveling and jet lag and different things happen. But in general, when we have a consistent bedtime, our body knows when to start to feel tired. If you eat dinner at 7 every night, you start to feel hungry around 6:30 because your body knows to expect food. When you're going to bed around the same time every night, your body knows when to feel tired. It's going to make it easier to fall asleep for the people that struggle to fall asleep. If you are finding that you're laying in bed for an hour every single night until you fall asleep, instead of getting in bed that hour earlier, do something out of bed and get in bed an hour later. Most people make the mistake that if it's taking them a long time to fall asleep, that they keep stretching the window and make it wider and wider because they're thinking that they have to spend more time in bed. But actually, our sleep is healthier when it's more efficient and less fragmented. So squeezing the window, it's like squeezing the air out of the Ziploc bag or defragmenting a computer. That's where with the scheduling, the other key importance is having a set wake time. Now, this is tricky for people because if your wake time Monday through Friday is 6 a.m. to get up for work, that means that your wake time on Saturday and Sunday should also be 6 a.m. Sleeping in doesn't make your sleep better. It actually confuses the body because if it knows that it's waking up at 6 a.m. every single day, no matter when you go to bed, your body and brain can figure out how to properly allocate for healing. Okay, if she's getting up at 6 and she goes to bed at midnight, I know I have 6 hours. Okay, how much time should I spend healing the body and brain tonight? Tonight she went to bed at 10. Okay, I have 8 hours to work with. How do I allocate for the best ROI? And so that's where having the consistent bed and wake time, now let's say we're sleeping in till 9 on Saturday. Well, now we're not going to be tired until later Saturday night. And then we sleep in till 9 on Sunday. And now we're tired at midnight instead of 10 p.m. Sunday night. So now we don't fall asleep till later. We have to get up earlier on Monday for work, and now we start the week tired. And that puts more stress and strain on the body.
Mm,
If we think about stress as the demands on our resources, the demands are exceeding the resources. So we have demands for our time, demands for our energy, and we don't have enough to fill the space. It's just like a stress fracture. There's too much pressure, it breaks. So what is taking our time? What is taking our energy? And so sleep is going to help us to refill that tank. So when we start prioritizing our sleep, it doesn't mean that we have to spend more time sleeping. But if we start focusing on it, prioritizing it, protecting it, we can become more efficient with it, which means we heal better and our stress will significantly drop.
very interesting. So I have one last question for you.
Sure.
And that is, how much sleep do we really need? And does that vary with age? Because I do notice that sleep patterns change as people get older.
There's a lot of variability in all of it. So the 8-hour number that society tells us, that is an average. It's just like a shoe size. Right now in the US, the average US woman's shoe size is an 8.5 to a 9. I bet many people listening would have a larger or a smaller foot. It's the same thing with that 8-hour number for sleep. There are some people that need more and they barely give themselves 8 hours in their schedule and they wake up and they always feel tired. And then there are the people that need less and they wake up after 6 or 7 hours and feel amazing until they look at the clock. And then they immediately feel tired because their brain told them they should. So
Mm.
the key is that we do need to determine how much sleep we need. That sleep window will actually help us do that because if we're setting a key amount of time, we take the amount of sleep we're currently getting. Say you're only getting 6 hours of sleep a night right now. That's okay. We set a window, maybe 12 midnight to 6 a.m. And we do that for 7 days and we see how our body responds. Are we falling asleep within 10 to 15 minutes? Are we sleeping through the night, minus waking up once to use the restroom? Are we waking up and feeling rested? If that's you, where you fall asleep quickly, you sleep straight through the night, you wake up and feel rested and don't need a nap, then you're getting what your body and brain needs right now. If you're waking up multiple times over and over again, sometimes we need to shrink the window because we're spending too much time in bed. Now, never shrink it less than 5 hours. And for the folks that are sleeping through the night, but they're still tired, those are the ones that need to grow the window because we're not getting the full amount. And as you said, that sleep amount will change over the course of our lives. It doesn't seem to make sense because we think, well, we're young and we can pull the all-nighters and be fine the next day. And the older we get, even think about getting 20 minutes of less sleep makes us feel tired. But that's just because we heal differently. Think about how much sleep a newborn gets versus a 6-month-old, a 2-year-old, a 10-year-old. Sleep is for that cell growth, that regeneration. And we hit a certain stage of our life where we're not having the growth spurts anymore. I always joke and say, other than our waistlines, but those we're trying to stop. But, but the idea behind it is that yes, as we get older, we're going to need less sleep. And so maybe you've always gone to bed at the same time and you used to be able to sleep until 9 and now you're waking up at 6. It doesn't always mean that something's wrong. It's no different than the senior specials where the portion size has gotten smaller because our body needs less calories because it's less active. If we're
Mhm.
not using our body and brain as much as we get older and we're not as active, there's not as much that needs to heal and repair. So we wouldn't need as much heal and repair time, which is what our sleep is for. So the more active we are, I mean, I have folks in their 80s and 90s still getting 8, 9 hours of sleep a night. It just depends on what your body needs, your genetics, your activity level, many metrics. But in general, the older we get, we will need less sleep.
Well, you've shared some incredible information for our audience today. And thank you so much for being a guest on the show. If you want to learn more about Dr. Milanak and her practice, you can go to her website, and that website is at melissamalanik.com. I'm going to leave that in the show notes as well, and I will include the link on the screen. She also has some special offers that maybe you want to tell them about on your website that they might want to take advantage of.
Yes. So I have some free downloadable materials, sleep well guide, a video library. I also have the option for consultations. And if you fill out the consultation form and mention that you heard about it from this podcast, then you're able to qualify for a free consultation as well. So many different resources on there. And the book will be coming out in the next few months. And that will also have a podcast discount that will be available.
Excellent. Do you have a title for the book yet?
The book is called Sleep for Success. So it's being published by Wiley. Very excited about this coming out.
Yes.
It'll be many of the tips and tricks we've talked about today and much more information to help people to be able to think sharper, to be able to perform better, really optimize for their career and their personal lives.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for all the valuable information you shared.
Thank you and sweet dreams.